This actually comes from the Earth Gospel, a guide to prayer for God's creation, written by Sam Hamilton Poore.
Nice.
The devotion for today, I'm going to use the one from this morning. From Isaiah 66:23, from new moon to new moon, and from Sabbath to Sabbath, all flesh shall come to worship before me, says the Lord. And from Genesis 2, thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all their multitude. And on the seventh day God finished the work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all the work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, because on it God rested from all the work that he had done in creation. And this is from Jürgen Moltmann. According to the biblical Jewish and Christian traditions, God created the world for his glory out of love. And the crown of creation is not the human being, it is the Sabbath. It is true that as the image of God, the human being has his special position in creation, but he stands together with all other earthly and heavenly beings in the same hymn of praise of God's glory, and in the enjoyment of God's Sabbath, pleasure over creation, as he saw that it was good. Even without human beings, the heavens declare the glory of God. Let's say a word of prayer. Creator Spirit, mighty wind of God, you brood over our lives and speak new life into our chaos. You set your Sabbath apart for your service. Your Sabbath celebrates the flowering of creation, the wedding of our hopes to your divine yearning. In the light of your holy Sabbath, each day is holy. In the overflowing is Sabbath joy, each moment is sacred. As we read in the story of creation, now the whole universe, sky, earth, and all their array was completed. With the seventh day, God enjoyed rest from the labor of creation. Then God blessed the seventh day and called it holy. Overshadow us now with your beauty and your joy, that our world may know a Sabbath of wholeness and peace, today and forever. Amen. All right, David, you are up.
Wow, thank you for that opening, Eric. It makes me think that we need to give the earth a rest. You think about COVID and the way we've given it, or we'll talk a little more about COVID impacts on climate change here in a moment, but it's been a respite, a bit of a respite for the planet and for the climate. What COVID has done, we'll talk about that. And actually, speaking of that, of course, we got in this mess anyway by going in places where we don't belong, extracting exotic creatures out of the last wild places, and it comes back on us. So we need to leave some things alone in terms of the COVID thing. And of course, the climate, that fits right into this because we have given the world a bit of a rest. The climate impacts have temporarily taken a blip downward. If we could but sustain it, it could be our ticket out of this mess. But we'll talk about that as we go along here. Well, it's great to see you all. Thanks for coming out this afternoon. I have been bragging on you about this particular thing that you're doing in some emails and sort of things like that to give other congregations the idea of this kind of Sunday afternoon community conversations. Of course, lots of people are doing lots of creative things, but I really appreciated what you all have been doing on these. I know they're a bit sporadic, but that's great. I mean, just great that you've done it and to have a conversation like this. Well, the West Coast, you poor people, you got a triple whammy right now. I mean, the stuff that all of us are experiencing in terms of COVID and the racial justice campaigns, and now you've got the climate calamity. As I've said to some of you in response to your posts, you on the West Coast are taking it on the chin for the rest of us and our climate sins. And we can see this in play around the world too, and we'll be talking about that as we move along. Other people taking it on the chin for what people elsewhere have done. Not that you're not contributing, but we all are contributing, and you're facing the brunt of it at the moment. Greenhouse gases are a good thing, and everybody in this crowd probably knows this. We had, it's like a little bit of a blanket around the Earth, trapping in some of the sun's energy and warmth. Currently, the average world temperature is about 56 degrees. summer, winter, day, night, north, south, whatever, about 56 degrees. With no greenhouse gases, they say we'd be at 0. We'd be popsicles down here. So we need some of that. But you know, like so many things in the humans, we tend to do it in excess. You put too many blankets on the bed, you're going to get warm. You put too many layers of greenhouse gases around the earth and populate them with more of the gases, you're going to get warm, which is what we're doing. And you know the reasons, and we'll talk about that as we go along. Just to give you the numbers on this, kind of the baseline for greenhouse gases in the atmosphere is about 280 parts per million. That's what they say it was for before the Industrial Revolution. Well, we're at about 415 now. So 280 parts per million to 415 parts per million. The Ice Age, the last Ice Age was 180 parts per million. So that was 100 parts per million on the cold side, and we got an Ice Age out of it. Now we're over 100 parts per million on the warm side. What's the opposite of an Ice Age? I mean, that's kind of where we're headed. In fact, David Wallace Wells, I'm going to be taking a lot of information from his book, The Uninhabitable Earth. He says the 21st century 22nd century could be a century of hell. I mean, that's opposite of Ice Age, I guess, is hell, at least in the popular imagination. So currently, the world is putting out about 33 billion tons of CO2 per year. It seems like only yesterday it was 24 billion tons. I mean, when I started, I guess about probably 15 years ago when I and lots of us started zooming in on climate change as the threat it was 24 billion tons. Now we're at 33. The United States kicks in about 5 billion tons. So whatever percentage that is, China has taken the lead. We used to be the lead, but China's taken the lead, partly because they make a bunch of our stuff. But China's taking. So we've got about an average of a 1.5 degree rise in temperature Celsius, which I think around 2.7 Fahrenheit. Around the world right now from the baseline of, whenever that would have been 1750 or something. We're about 1.5 degrees Celsius above that, or 2.7 Fahrenheit, which basically means things are getting warmer. Now, Eric, I don't know if we have the chance to have an interchange at this point. Can people respond verbally, or do you want people to type things in if I had a question? What's the best way to do that? Eric, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Everyone's muted right now. But
okay.
Yeah, if somebody does have like something to add or a question,
well, I was going to ask a question to the group.
Okay, yeah.
So I was just going to say,
you just have to unmute yourself.
So if you'd like, unmute yourselves for a moment and just tell me what's the problem with the world getting warmer. What are some of the consequences? Now, don't know one person take all the good ones, but what are some of the consequences of the world warming? Can you give me some examples?
Fires.
Fires are certainly one of them. Yes.
The ice caps melting.
Ice caps melting is a big one and going to get bigger. Yes.
Weather extremes, wetter in places and drier in places.
Yes. Yes. Ironically, and here in Virginia, we've had wetter situations sometimes intermingled with drier times, but in Sudan right now, not South Sudan, but Sudan, they have unprecedented flooding. And throughout the kind of that sub-Saharan Africa, floods are as big a thing for them and trouble for them as drought. And then, of course, the failure of the monsoon rains that don't come in a regular way. Okay, fine. What else? Who else has got other things? Anything else you want to add?
Rise. Ocean.
Did someone say?
Sea rise.
Can you speak up?
Sea rise.
Yeah, sea level rise, big. They say that we're at 415 parts per million now. If we got to 500 parts per million, the last time that concentration of greenhouse gases was in the atmosphere, the sea levels rose 130 feet. Just to give you an idea. So yes, sea level rise is a big one and going to get bigger as things keep warming. Yes.
Well, when the ocean's warm, there's a lot of the animals in the ocean.
Yes, yes, yes. It's a big problem, actually. And in things the phytoplankton for one thing, which produce, nobody really knows, but 50 to 80% of our oxygen. They're struggling to deal with the warmer Antarctic and Arctic waters. And they're the base of the food chain, and they generate a huge amount of our oxygen. So things in the ocean, and we used to fish certain fish off the coast of Virginia. They've all moved north now. So, of course, that's an impact on the fish, and of course, the impact on the human economy as well. They say, no, that was plastic. Never mind. I almost gave you a plastic statistic, but never mind. That's a whole nother story. So those are all good ones. We covered a lot of ground right there. The causes of greenhouse gas emissions globally are sort of by sector. Agriculture is responsible for about a third globally of greenhouse gases. Deforestation, about a fifth. Fashion, interestingly enough, 6% of greenhouse gases is the fashion industry. I mean, who would have thought? But producing all the stuff and then shipping it and fabricating it, and I don't know what else happens to it, but you know, fashion's evidently a big one. Food waste. I mean, these are sort of micro things, but they're significant. 3% of greenhouse gases from food waste. And I think partly because of the wasted energies in producing the food and shipping it and packaging it, and then you're wasting it, not to mention when it goes into landfills, methane, which is a very, very significant, much more impactful per molecule to the atmosphere than carbon dioxide. And so methane releases from landfills and other places like that. Transportation, about a quarter of the world's greenhouse emissions. And in terms of the United States, it's kind of even, more or less, between residential, commercial, industry, and transportation. All of them around a third or a little less in terms of our driving, our consumption, and our heating and cooling and lighting and all that sort of thing. They're in there as the main culprits. And here they say only 10% is agriculture. There's some that dispute that and say it really much higher. I'm not really sure. We talked about COVID a moment ago. There was a time in April when CO2 emissions were down by about 20% globally because of all of us working from home and, you know, all the other reasons, industry shutting down, transportation, all those things. They say probably for the year around 7 or 8% reduction. Here's the trick. We need that year after year for about the next 10 years if we really want to get ahead of the curve on climate change. So imagine the reductions we've had and thinking about how do we systematize that to get that same sort of bounce out of coming years. I mean, that really is what the people that know said we have to be doing and doing, starting soon to get that done. So, and if not, and we already talked about some of the consequences of a warmer world, I'll give you the degrees and then the problem with each degree rise. All right, we're already at 1.5 degrees Celsius rise. 2 degrees rise in Celsius, the ice sheets begin to collapse. 3 degrees rise, they say Europe will be in permanent drought. 4 degree rise, you're not going to want to hear this, California. 4 degree rise Celsius, 16 times more wildfires.
The whole state.
And then a 7 degree rise Celsius, the human body cannot cool itself. And there will be places in the equatorial regions, large cities, where that could be the factor in, 100 years. The body will not cool itself. So, that's sort of, in terms of God's creation, we are part of that, I know, but I'm thinking of it as all the stuff that's not causing problems here, the other living things. There have been 5 mass extinctions throughout biotic history, 4 of them caused by greenhouse gases and 1 by the thing that hit us from outer space. The most notorious, evidently, was 250 million years ago. There was a 5 degree rise in global temperatures, I guess from greenhouse gases, from who knows what volcanoes, whatever else. It is said to have ended all but a sliver of life on Earth. A 5 degrees Celsius rise, which would be, about 12, 13 degrees Fahrenheit, something like that. We're on track for 4 degrees by 2100. Unless we do something. So there's always the unless. It's like that text in Romans where Paul says, therefore. You've got all this stuff going on, therefore it's in our hands now. So that's going to be kind of, we'll get to the hopeful part of this later, but and the journal Nature said, in the coming decades, we can prepare for large swaths of the ecosystem faltering in waves. Because as you all know, these things are all interconnected. You know, one thing goes, the phytoplankton go, you know, the next thing up the food chain goes. And so, you know, it's really, yeah, we're looking at, I mean, a potential cataclysm. And of course, we're connected to that eventually. All of that, of course, we're connected to eventually, which the myth of human exceptionalism will soon go out the window. So I've got some photos for you. And by the way, this is our problem. A lot of us in this circle here tonight have been around 50, 60 years, whatever. 85% of our greenhouse gas emissions have occurred since 1945. So in this recent, our and the previous generation have been the ones who set this in motion. Unknowingly, you know, at first, nobody really knew what we were doing, that this was going to be an outcome, but that's what eventually has happened. So I'm going to take you two places. I thought I would do both an environmental and a human justice situation. I'll try to go through this kind of quickly because I know I get too talkative here, and I want to leave us plenty of time for discussion. So here we go. This is, I was driving home from West Virginia last spring, I guess, not this past, but the last one before. Came by the Red River in Kentucky, and this was a farm. I guess they're going to have to go with tilapia from here on out. It was the wettest spring in the American Southeast, spring before last. And this spring, we also got a huge amount of rain. I don't know the numbers on this spring. So we're going to go into me. So I'm just saying, I'm taking you around the world here, although Alaska is sort of technically in the United States. But it's also right at home, as you know, with your experience. And now we in the East also know from especially flooding events. We're going to Myanmar. So here's a young woman looking out the door, out the window. That's Thanakin on her face, made out of tree bark. You spin it on a wheel, makes a little paste, and it's a cultural and a sunscreen and a skin conditioner. Up into the hill areas, we've never been to this area before. This was May before last. So I'm showing you pictures I've not shown you before. A lot of these will be. We're up into the dry zone, which is even drier now because of climate change. There is the reservoir. You can see on the stanchion there where they can tell how deep it is. It's below the lowest mark. So this is in the dry zone of the country of Myanmar. These are women who live, communities, of course, in that area. These are some women there who have been making their living mostly working with bamboo. And you can see the mat, you can see the walls. They sold stuff, they made household items, all this stuff. It's too hot and dry to grow bamboo anymore. So a couple repercussions of this. One is, they told us now in the wintertime, for a month or 6 weeks, they migrate to China to cut sugar cane. Now, it's I think about a 2-week walk to China. And imagine how the Chinese, how are you going to be treated on a Chinese sugarcane plantation? And what kind of pay you're going to get? But there's such desperation, they have to do that now because there's nothing for them at home. They also told us that in this one village, about 100 of their young women had migrated to the cities, the big cities in Myanmar, because the economy of the region was gone because of climate change. And here's a third thing that I and you find around the world. People have to make an income some way. They have to feed their families. And you can't grow food anymore for yourself, and so you turn to charcoal production. There you can see, look at the devastation. That was a forest. And you're cutting down the trees, which of course comes back on you in terms of more climate change. But you got to do something to earn your income. So yeah. All right, so we're leaving the dry zone. We're going down to the Delta. There's our group from a couple of years ago. There are probably some people in that picture you know. Oh, Catherine Bache there with the hat on the right and the top. She lives out in San Francisco now, by the way. Anyway, from Laverne area. I just threw in a plastic picture. I just had to get that in for you. You all know plastic is the big issue. Down in the delta of Myanmar, Myanmar is the country in the world that's third most vulnerable to climate change. There are a lot of coastal areas. It's sort of in Typhoon Alley. They've cut down, I'll tell you what else they've done. But you can see the houses are on stilts. This is probably 10 miles from the sea, but it's so flat that that have the tidal rise up the channels. So you can see the wet spot there where it's been coming. This is also where they grow the majority of their rice. It's going to be an issue. Field by field by field submerged in salt water. It'll be a humanitarian disaster in slow motion. And the world probably will not notice. Again, because it's in Vietnam, they've already had to abandon coastal rice growing fields because of sea level rise. And this is the breadbasket of that part of the world, rice production. And they've cut down the coastal mangrove swamps to make shrimp farms. there's what mangrove swamps look like. And so then 2008, you had Cyclone Nargis. The combination, we didn't mention a while ago, one of the impacts of a warmer world, more moisture in the atmosphere and more violent storms. Cyclone Nargis, winds 150 miles an hour, killed 135,000 people in one night. So they're right on in that bullseye of these kind of tropical storms and other. These two friends of mine and some of their friends climbed that palm and clung for 11 hours, they said, because there was a 12-foot sea surge. They lost half their village. So these are my friends, two of the women. We've been doing things in Myanmar for about a decade. Well, more than that, but in these communities in the Delta, about a decade. So I've gotten to know the women pretty well. And when they start to know you well, anywhere in the world, they're freer to ask you questions. So this is Marmar Wynn on the left in the pink blouse there. She's sort of the natural and elected leader of the women's group there. We do microloan projects with these women. 2 trips ago, we're sitting around talking after supper, and she said, "May I ask you something?" I said, "Sure." She said, "Can you tell me, why is it that some people in the world are so rich and the rest of us are so poor?" Fortunately, I just read Jared Diamond's Guns, Germs, and Steel. So I was able to tell him it's not because of your smarts or because of your religion or because of your hard work, mostly the luck of the geographic draw. And this year, I say this year, the last trip, which was May before last, we're sitting around and again, we're having this conversation. And she asks, how do we keep the waters from rising? This was 2010. No. Yes, 2010. This is 18 months after Nargis, the cyclone. It had wiped these areas clean of trees. We've done some reforestation there in these areas. It does feel like a different world. Now, whether this will stand up to the next cyclone, who knows? But it's a bit of remediation. And the women themselves, from their microloan projects, saved some of that money and used it to build a cyclone shelter for their community. The book Drawdown, which some of you probably read, it gives like the 75 most important things we need to do to take a bite out of climate change. 2 of the top 10 are educate girls and empower women, because they will know how to respond in these situations. So this could be an illustration in that book. Women with resources at their disposal, which they've never had before these microloans, they use some of it for the good of the community, especially vis-a-vis climate change and cyclones. So, yeah. Bye-bye, Myanmar. Hello, Alaska. Last stop on our little journey. You know Denali when you see it. Yeah, mother moose and a calf. Mama having lunch. Woo, yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. Okay, so fine. Now, here's the story I want to tell you. This is not happening in Alaska. It's happening in the northern tier of the lower 48, where there's still moose, Minnesota, Montana, Maine, whatever. The ticks, and maybe you know about this. But the ticks the winters aren't cold enough to kill off the ticks, and they're moving more north than they ever have been, and they're infesting the moose, especially the calves. And now the calf mortality rate is like 40 or 50% in their first year. It used to be like 12 or 15. And they count the number of ticks on a dead carcass when they find the calf in the springtime. The wildlife biologists, the average number of ticks per calf, 47,317.
Wow.
I mean, what a way to go. Having the blood sucked out of you when it's not your fault. They've gotten to this point in God's creation by their wits, their wild, their strength, and now they're being done in climate change. All right, so here in Alaska, this was a couple of years ago. Oh, there's the Leard family from down in Southern California someplace. Anyway, that's one of their boys there in the orange. We do a work day in Denali every year, just a volunteer day. We're getting gravel and helping build a trail, which now is used. Really cool. But that's like 6 years ago. This was that same spot this last summer. They said we didn't have any rain all summer long. They were in a serious drought. And then it happened to rain the week we were there, which was not great for us camping. But it just shows, as Carl mentioned maybe earlier, the swing, the yin and the yang. Now that's too mild a term, but the way the rainfall and the drought patterns. And then when it comes, it pours, and you've got washout. There we are. We climb this mountain every year, Mount Margaret. We always see a big bull caribou up there. They eat the lichen on the ground. That's what they're grazing. And even in the wintertime, that's what that prehensile antler is about. So you can dig down through the snow and get to the lichen. That's your food source. The rangers told us now, because by the way, October before last, there was not a day below freezing in Denali National Park. Alaska as a whole is about 5 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than it was 25 years ago. But they said because you've got a freeze-thaw cycle going on through the winter now, not just it snows, stays puffy and whatever till springtime. No, it's freeze-thaw, so you get a crust on the snow. The caribou are having trouble getting down through the snow with that animal. The Canada jay, they must be omnivores. They catch little critters and they store them like in a cache over winter to eat like when things are tough in February or March. Well, now it's not staying frozen all winter. You know what happens if you keep unplugging your freezer, as Pacific Gas and Electric's been doing to you guys. I don't know whether in Live Oak, but you know, they've had to cut the power on and off. Things spoil. And the food of this Canada jay doesn't make it through the winter anymore, the stuff that it was planning on eating in springtime. And bobcat, the lynx, they're being run out of their habitat, not in Denali yet, but in other parts of Canada by bobcats that are moving further north. So up in the far north, this is Arctic Village, Alaska, where we visit the Gwich'in people. This is a picture from like 1970s. I wasn't there. I took a picture of a picture. Here's the same place 2 summers ago.
Mm-hmm.
We are changing the face of the Arctic. There's permafrost melt. There's 3 trillion tons of CO2 stored in the permafrost around the northern hemisphere. If it falls and releases that CO2, it's pop goes the weasel. And there you see it falling really literally melting into the Chandalar River there, which affects all kinds of things that I won't take time to talk about. Of course, glaciers are melting all over the world. In Denali, like, I don't know, this was maybe 3 summers ago, we're on the bus ride going back into the park, and the driver's sort of the narrator, and at some point she says, oh, there was a glacier there. It went away. At the next rest stop, I said, ma'am, I didn't quite say it this belligerently, but ma'am, it went away. You need to tell people why it went away. There's climate change here in Alaska. Well, she never got around to bringing that up. So so this is the Exit Glacier down in Seward. We spent a day down in 2 days in Seward, do a sea life thing and see a glacier. There's where you see that little patch of white above the people in the white jackets. This is where the glacier was in 1926. There's where it is now. You see it up there? There's my son and I, some of you know Daniel, a lot of you know Daniel. Anyway, this is like 2003. You could get that close to the glacier. It was way down the valley. So here it was in 2017. So you can imagine 2003 is around the corner to the left here somewhere. There it is in 2017. There it is in 2019. 2017, 2019. One of the advantages of going back to places again and again, you can tell the story in a time-lapsed way, which can be very effective as you educators know. Bark beetles, which you've got loads of in California. I know that's part of your problem there with these fires. They're encroaching toward Denali. This is about 40 miles south of the park. The ranger said they're heading our way. But the dead trees, you know, and there's one aspen or something in the middle there that the bark beetles don't like, but they like that spruce. And these are forest fires in Alaska and covering up, yeah. And then there's the poster child. That's the best picture I've ever gotten of an American pika. The poster child of climate change. The ranger told us the pika are having to move up the mountain to get cooler. They said they have an internal thermostat. If it regularly gets over 78 degrees, they tend to explode. That was the verb he used. I think he means their blood boils. So there's Charlie Swaney, our guide up at Arctic Village when we visit there. This is hot off the press. I didn't put this in here till this afternoon. He just posted on Facebook yesterday a favorite lake of theirs where they would go hunt moose against subsistence hunters. They'd go hunt moose there. He said now it's not there anymore. The lake has disappeared. And he had a 2-word explanation: climate change. And primarily, it's because the permafrost is melting and the water seeps down through the soil. It's not frozen anymore to keep the water up. It seeps down through the soil. And this is, I think, my last picture on this sequence. This is from today. I biked up a mountain to attend this church service as my buddy was preaching. My legs can feel it, actually. Anyway, when I was a kid, this is near my aunt and uncle's house. And this is the last third of a hill that's that steep for the rest of the 2/3. And we would go over in the wintertime when we still had snow in Virginia, which we hardly do anymore. We go to the top of that and we sled down. And you're going like, you know, lightning speed on your lightning glider. And then you're coming to the bottom and you can barely see the sign there, but it says 1-lane bridge. So you've got to be able to hit the bridge. And I don't mean, you know what I'm saying, hit it to keep from hitting it. You know what I'm saying. Anyway, and so I was like 12 years old. I remember doing it one time. I had these rubber boots you put in on over your shoes. I was so scared going down that long hill. I wore a hole in the toe of my boots, dragging them as brakes to try to slow myself down.
Mhm.
And I'm telling you this because a couple of months ago in the New York Times, Gernot Wagner, and another writer whose name I don't remember, had an article called The Long Slide. And he said, climate change is like a long slide. It's not like a precipice necessarily, although you people in California might disagree right now. But generally, it happens gradually, but it's got gravity on its side, we might say, and it's pulling us down, but we don't notice it as we're going because it happens incrementally. But what I'm thinking is, if I was dragging my toes because I was worried about the 1-lane bridge at the bottom, why aren't we collectively dragging our toes when not a 1-lane bridge awaits us, but really a lake of fire? So that's, to me, that's what's at stake. So that's that for this moment. Let's see if I can figure out, I'll stop my screen sharing. And so now, I think it's chat time. And Eric, I don't know if you have a plan for this, or if you'd like people to volunteer things or questions or comments, or I don't want you responding to me necessarily, but whatever comes out from you for our group to talk about or any of us to chat about. So.
Just want to open the floor to just general conversation to have amongst each other, or if anybody does have any questions for David, I'm sure David would be willing to answer them, or just, and you know, one of the things I wanted to engage us in was what we as individuals and as communities of faith can do to, instead of just talking about climate change, we're really good at talking, but what are some practical ways and practical actions we can take to fight climate change and you know, try to do whatever we can to reverse its damages. So I'll open the floor. I see Sharon has her hand up, so.
I had a question for David or anyone. I want to know if I vote a particular way in November and we re-sign the Paris Accord and we reinstitute climate change policies, how long will it take us to reverse the damage that's been done in the past 4 years? Can we reverse the damage, David?
It's probably, it set us back 4 years. Let's say that. We should have started this process, of course, 4 years ago, but it's probably still not too late, and especially if the next administration after this and the one after that is even more progressive or radical in this way. I mean, if Biden, if we have change, well, climate, I won't talk about any other issues. For the climate, it's critically important that we have a change of leadership. And if we do, I've seen, and I guess Bernie's had his ear, evidently, because he's got a fairly progressive climate agenda, Biden does. And so as long, and especially if we have young people continuing to foment rebellion about climate, and then some of us old people get our iron in the fire, it will take a Herculean effort, Sharon. I mean, it really requires a change. Think about the systems: agriculture, transportation, home heating and cooling, manufacture and shipping, and all, those are, and deforestation. Those are the sectors, and those are big entities. So it'll take multiple fronts is what it will take. It also takes a change in our own mindsets about what's important and what we really need. And nobody really asked that question, and that's, to me, the question of the church. What is nature to us? Where do we fit into the scheme of things? And how much are we willing to put off current pleasures for future necessities? And that's, it's hard for any politician to bring that up. Very hard. But we might be, and thanks to you all, and you're burning before our eyes, maybe, this puts another impetus on it. We almost have to have, when I talk to high school and college kids, I say, what's it going to take to get us on another track? Often they use one word: catastrophe. Mm. And we wish for that not to be the case, but you guys are doing it for us out on the West. So anyhow, and unfortunately, it's hitting nature and the poor world much more. It's serious. It's hitting all of us, but they don't have the resources to deal with it, and so, and we are not that tuned into their suffering. I didn't show you my Malawi pictures. I was there maybe before last. They're down to a meal a day. So part of it is, what can we do to make it real to people? So that's a question for, let me ask that question, Eric, if you don't mind. What can we do to move people off square and our communities off square in a new direction? Or to get more people to pay. I know there's some people that aren't going to come along, but for those who are in that vast middle ground, how do we, what's it take to move people in a climate-friendly direction? Who's got some ideas on that?
Well, I know for me, I think a lot of it is just that visual representation, seeing it. A lot of times, that whole phrase, you got to see it to believe it. And some of those comparison photos were showing, you were showing, like, this is this place 2 years ago, this is what it looks like now. That is such a stark difference within 2 years. So I think, like being actually confronted with, this is what's happening, and this is what's happening to, you talk about the Malawi people down to one meal a day. I doubt any of us here in this meeting could fathom what it would be like to eat one meal a day. So I think just being confronted with that real physical, visual, this is how it's really affecting,
Who else? Any other ideas?
One thing that's new in our community, and Sue may be aware of this too, we got a mailer from our garbage company, I guess you would say, Recology, and they now have a in the can that you put. We have three garbage cans: one that goes into the landfill, one that you recycle papers and certain things, and one that has like your grass clippings and that kind of thing. Well, in the grass clipping box now, we can put any paper, even if it's soiled, food, including meat, bones. It's biomass, I guess, and I think it's burned or incinerated to make electricity or some kind of energy. It's supposed to be, and I don't know, maybe David knows more about this. It's supposed to help, for one thing, keep the landfill.
Yeah.
And actually use these things. I don't know. It's just a new thing that started the last couple of months.
Barb, I'm curious as to whether it's incentivized economically. In other words, some places weigh the trash, and you're charged for your trash by weight, but your recycling rod's free. And so it's a nice economic incentive to separate your stuff. So in your case, is it all just part of one bill, sort of? And
yeah, we just get billed so much a month.
So you're not, okay, you're not.
No,
rewarded.
none of it's by weight. It's $80 every 3 months or something.
I was just curious.
About, what, $15 a month or something.
Because people respond to economic incentives.
Yeah, there's no incentive to do it.
Sorry?
There's no incentive to do it, except for me around my house.
Yeah,
say, you have to do this, you have to put it over here.
Right. And so we that's another thing we need to be doing in our communities. Is if we had a meaningful carbon tax, which would be a huge, big step for the world, but if we had to, things are carbon intensive, just become more expensive, then we find other ways to do it, and the market sort of steps in.
Yeah.
They're all against socialization, or not the right word, socialism.
Socialism.
We've really socialized the environmental costs. We've outsourced them to the planet and to the future. So we're really subsidizing our bad behaviors by not charging the real price for our bad behaviors now. So the real capitalist approach, if we want to be hard tack capitalist here, would be to charge people for the damage they're causing, which we don't really do.
No.
Hardly in anything. You all do have a deposit on your drink cans, I think, don't you?
Yeah.
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 I mean, that doesn't seem like much, but it's huge. I guarantee you your recycling rate is far exceeds states that do not have that. So it's because of it, just a small economic incentive. So I'm sorry, go ahead. Who else has got other ideas? How do we shift thinking, attitudes, actions?
What's going to be the impact of electric vehicles?
It all depends on where your power comes from, Bev.
Where the fire, that's what I've asked, wondering.
That's really the key factor. And I've seen lots of windmills in California. I don't know what percentage of your power comes from wind or water or something else.
Solar.
That to me, I mean, okay, that's one part of that's one part of the answer. The second one is it still takes a lot of energy to make a car and a lot of space for those highways. And I wish we were moving more toward, you guys do a fairly good job of this in some sectors in California with mass transit, but that's what we need to get people out of our individual cars. An electric car, if the energy is coming green, is a step in the right direction. But in America, we're just so tied to our individual transportation options that it's getting us in trouble. We've designed our whole urban landscapes around that, except in some few places, as you all know. So that'd be the answer to that, Bev. I mean, as far as I know. Yeah.
And I know, like with the electric cars, like the Tesla, I mean, to manufacture the battery to run that thing, it's not the most environmentally friendly process.
Yeah.
I mean, the Tesla, I mean, it's a great idea, a fully electric car, but I mean, to get it is just like, so I think one question to ask is, does do the ends justify the means?
Right. You have to do the life cycle analysis of things. And if you don't do the full, like from beginning to the waste process, the waste that goes in, comes out of making something to how it's disposed of eventually. I mean, until we do that kind of analysis, we can be barking up the wrong tree because we're not being serious about looking at the whole scheme of things within a particular product, whatever it is. Carl, you got your thing off. I bet you're ready to talk.
Oh, I was just going to say, communicating the issues more with young people, with students, or with our children, or with our nieces and nephews, or whoever it might be.
Yeah. That's
because
critical.
we're going to be around when we're all dead.
Yes. And they are open to this for the most part. As you all know, I do a lot of schools. I've done some in your communities. And they're open to thinking about this. And you can catch them now and get them thinking a little on a different wavelength, like a lot of you in that congregation do with your own classes. That's really important. And plus, their energy can feed us. I mean, I get cards, I get little handmade. Wait, let's see. Hold on a second. Yeah, here it is. Oh yeah, okay. Can you see this? I can't see my screen, so I don't know if you can see it. But and this girl, she raised money she said, I was given the opportunity to donate money to an organization of my choice. I chose NCP because you guys are doing great things for the planet. And I don't know how much money she sent me. I forget. Molly B. from McPherson, Kansas. But she made the card and everything. And so, that inspires us. So we hopefully inspire them. All of you do. And so the energy, that feedback loop of the energy, that's really critical, Carl. Very critical. Yeah. I remember a classroom I was doing down at Tracy at Laverne. What's Tracy's last name? You know what I'm talking about. But the Edward B. Haynes Elementary School, and had a bunch of third graders, and we were talking about this stuff. And I was thinking, what can you do as kids to help cut back on climate change and all these gases? And one kid said, hide my parents' car keys. I said, great idea, just don't tell them I told you.
You don't want to get blamed.
But kids are willing to be creative about this, you know, and, you know, they don't mind riding a bicycle, honestly. On my bike rides, I see kids with these little gas-powered motor scooters running through their yard. The kid ought to be on a bicycle. Don't train him for the fossil fuel culture. Anyway, yes, kids. What else? Any other ideas you have about what we need to do to move the needle in people and communities?
Well, I know that our community here, our neighbors here, a lot of them have gone with solar energy and have solar panels. Most of the houses in my area are all solar. And I think that's one thing we can use. We can use the God-given gift of the sun.
Yes, which we do every day anyway. All of our fossil fuels
Right.
come from deposits from plants, basically. And so that the sun has given us all this in various ways. Now it's time to use it in a different model, which is that's great. That's great. What else? Anything else you got?
I have a question that might lead to a suggestion, but I don't know. Did you say 10% of the problem in the U.S. is agriculture? Was it 10%?
That's what they
Yes.
say. I think that's an EPA stat.
And is it raising crops to feed animals which take so much land, or is it chemicals, or is it the equipment and the exhaust?
Not so much the chemicals. I would say it's the, in this case, creating the grain to feed them, which is a big enterprise. And then it takes, you know, the grain, what is it, 16 pounds of grain to make 1 pound of beef or something like that. So there's water as well as energy impacts. Then you've got the land that has been taken up in some cases, not always, but trees cut to make land. And that's a big problem around the world with livestock, especially, is cutting down rainforests and that sort of thing. So that has climate impacts. And then you've got of course, all the other stuff, the shipping. And then the methane that the cows, evidently cows, especially fed models, belch a lot of methane. I think one time the stat I read was 640 quarts per day per cow, which is 23 times the greenhouse impact of CO2. So the methane, the feed production, the shipping and all that stuff. I've got a stat here for you. I've got a stat. It is right here. Cattle, I think this is globally, cattle produce 15% of greenhouse gases, and that probably is from deforestation and everything. They say 20 times more greenhouse gases per unit of protein than protein from plants. 20 times factor. So it's sort of one of our sacred cows, honestly, is our meat consumption. So in terms of a personal impact, and this is one thing I tell kids, although they're not always in control of their diet at home and in school or any place, but you know, one of the most simple things we can do is cut down on our meat consumption. I think you can save about a ton of CO2 per year if you go from meat-centric to vegetarian. Is worth about a ton of CO2 per person per year. Wow. So meat is a big one, and yet it's a tough one to broach with a lot of people.
So when it comes to agriculture, it's really not crops that are made for consumption by humans. It's the crops that are used for feed.
A huge percentage of the world's of agricultural land is for livestock. I've got that stat somewhere. I don't have it right here.
In California, that's not the case then. What we raise is for humans, almost everywhere.
Well, that's positive.
That I know of.
That's positive.
Down here by us, there's huge dairy industry, so I mean, we see huge amounts of corn and hay. It's silage.
Yeah.
But the farming that's done in California isn't for the animals, because the feed comes from other places. I'm just saying what we have in our state is different than the Midwest or some of the other areas, just because we don't really raise a lot of grain crops for animals that I know of. But there's tons of dairy.
How they do it.
In the
But I
central
read
part.
in the paper over in Sonoma County, which is over by San Francisco, they have a lot of dairies, and there's some of them that are somehow trapping the methane. I don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, you can capture the manure, and that would be the methane that comes not from the cow belching, but from the manure decay.
Yeah.
I don't know, that doesn't sound like the right words, decomposition, whatever. And they can, yes, you can trap that and use it. I've seen it done in Central America, actually, where they don't have fuel in the communities. Somebody taught them how to contain that manure and siphon off the methane and use it to light their light at night or something. So yes.
I mean, it just seems like we need such an incredible partnership between education and self-interest. As sad as this is, I mean, some of my reading, even with racism and that, I mean, people have to see a self-interest
Yes.
in it, sadly.
Yes.
And that is something we have to, it seems like, play on, take advantage of,
Yes.
you know, rather than in some ways, frankly, as much as keep trying to combat it. Because it's so rampant at this point in our country, anything's possible. But I think at this point, we really need to play on it also. And it just seems like we need we certainly all have to do our part from the grassroots, but it would certainly be helpful if from the administration of the country and in the administrations, even locally from governors or states, would do a massive educational campaign to show what has been happening in this time or where we are going on a very targeted and strategic scale.
Yeah.
Because if people could understand that they aren't going to exist, sadly, that's what's going to take. And then a massive scale of what we're doing here, of a strategically planned massive scale of here are the 5, 6, 7, 8, here's a bunch of things you can do in the dairy industry, in the foresting industry, I mean, if we could have a targeted massive partnership between, someone's got to do that though. And I don't want to say I'm not the person, because I really believe we all make a difference and it takes all these things, not one, but I really think we need a targeted strategic partnership between education and self-interest that comes from somewhere on a broader scale than even we can do. We can do things in our churches. Maybe we need to do that. Think globally and act locally with this too. But I think this is what somebody has to do. I know when I preached in the summer for a UU congregation on creation stuff and was doing some of the research online and learn just very little really on what you need to start, David, in April and May, and how much our lack of busyness has allowed them to hear things in the core of the earth and has changed some of the CO. And people have no clue about that. I mean, as a nation, we need to educate people to that as a way of also educating them to global warming and climate change is real. And here's part of the evidence. So that's enough verbiage, but I just feel more and more with this partnership of education and self-interest, and someone has to strategically plan it. That has to be a committee or a partnership of scientists and global people and also marketers, and someone has to pull that together, and that's a little beyond me, although I can advocate for that.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And you know, you guys know enough about me to know I'm not Mr. Pro-America or anything, but America has had the ability to rise to the occasion in other parts of our history. And if we have the right leadership and the right grassroots impetus and energy, there's no reason we couldn't rise up to do the right thing in this situation.
Why can't we organize something like after the world wars or something when people had to come together? Why can't we do that with this?
Well, that's exactly it. Yes. Well, and just to say, Aaron, you're talking about maybe you're not the one. We all do have different gifts in this, of course. And I admire our Sustainable Center directors so much because they get out there and do the community work. Like in Harrisonburg, they're just opened up the Greenway that we spent years planning and developing to give people another transportation option. They've got the city of Harrisonburg has adopted a plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions citywide by 50% by 2025.
Wow.
Because they did the hard work of I don't want to say lobbying, but building relationships with city, what are those people called, running the council and all that stuff. And Tom spent a lot of time working with the African-American mayor, female mayor, just to help her understand that this is a racial justice issue as well. As the environment comes apart, it's going to be people on the low end of the scale that are going to feel it first and worst. And so, you know, it's the hard community development work that not everybody, that's not my skill. I try to find what I can do, but like all of us, and then how do we empower those people who do those things and get behind them as the wind in their sails to help them do what they're being called to do in these situations.
Sharon has something she'd like to add.
it was about ecology. It was so easy to teach about racism. It was so easy to change systems, at least in the minds of children. Do we have curriculum that we can utilize so we can be teaching about ecology and the various things that are so obvious in our churches? Like the meeting you're having right now is in California. It sure isn't in Virginia. We need curriculum we can take into our churches and do this.
You know, Sharon, interesting you bring that up. When I'm in Minnesota, I stay at the home of Rhonda and Mark Pittman Gingrich, who some of you may know. Rhonda's been pretty big on the reimagining thing and all that business. She was a part of a group putting together a new curriculum, and it had to do with creation care, I believe. I don't know if it was for Bible schools or for Sunday school.
Yes, it did.
But, and I said, Rhonda, I'd be happy to put together some very tangible things that people can do. I think she floated that with the committee, but it never got anywhere. So I don't, you know, while we sort of give care for creation, I want to say lip service, in terms of the tangibility of it, I think a lot of that is lacking.
I think,
sorry, go ahead.
But I agree with Robin. While things are burning, and we can see that things are burning, and more hurricanes are more powerful, now is the time to go to our Christian ed departments and say, we must teach this in our church.
Great.
Because people have got.
Yeah, I think
Go ahead.
As far as within the church, it definitely needs to start on a local level, on a congregational level.
Yes, sir.
I think just within the Church of the Brethren on a denominational level. I mean, the most recent kind of climate care stuff that happened at annual conference and the committee they put together, it just seems that just kind of always gets brushed under the rug. Like, here, okay, you can do your little thing, but we're going to put you over here in the corner, and we're not really going to give you the time or energy. You know, and I think kind of the results of the most recent one, I kind of felt was, well, we're here for you if you want, but really you're kind of on your own. So I think it really has to start at a local congregational level and swell up from there.
Well, I've got a thought about that, and that is that you all out there are on the front lines of what climate change is doing to our forests with the bark beetles. With the fires and all that stuff, and you got sea level rise is going to be lapping at your doorsteps. What if your congregations there challenge the rest of us in the Church of the Brethren to take this seriously out of your own experience? I mean, it's really often the people on the front lines, like I told you the story of the people in Malawi down to a meal a day, that has that I think touched, made you feel a certain thing. Well, what if you all were the ones putting out the call as the ones who are in the conflagration, unfortunately, literally, to the rest of the communion, the Church of the Brethren, to say, we need you and we need your partnership, your solidarity, and we need to act now. And here's some things we're doing. Here's some things we're calling. It's just a thought. It just came to me just now. But sometimes those people who are in the midst of it have more, their voices have more power, and there's an urgency at this moment, as you have said. So that's just a thought. Maybe a little challenge to our West Coast brethren.
Mm-hmm. You can drop that hint when you do your insight session.
I could drop that hint. Yes, I'll keep that under my hat as a possibility. Yeah.
I've never been to annual conference, but isn't a topic called an inquiry, or is there another word? What's the word?
Called a query.
Query. It seems like if that came from someone who's been affected, maybe on the West Coast and in Oregon, Washington, or California, and it goes to the highest levels and becomes policy, and then the Church of the Brethren working with other denominations, like the Presbyterians and the Lutherans and so on, and whatever group. What is the group that brings all those together? Is it the Council of Churches, or?
Well, there is a National Council of Churches, yes.
Yeah, that would be the next step. So you could take someone who's been affected in our church, in our state, and go to the leadership for the congregation, for the denomination, and then go from there to a council with other denominations.
I will say that we tried a climate change query about 6 or 8 years ago that lost by 17 votes or something. But I do think at this moment, the nature of the constituency of the church is changing a bit as
Yeah.
things get roiled a bit. And there's also, with the wildfires and the flooding in the Midwest and all that, there could be more openness, and coming from, out your way could certainly be appropriate. Yeah. Do I see Pete? Pete, are you with us?
Yeah,
from
he joined.
Vermont?
Yeah.
Hello.
Hey, man. I don't want to neglect saying hi to you. And also, if you have any, in terms of community action, Pete, you've done a lot there in Starksboro. Could you just give these folks a word or two about what's the recipe for success of engaging your community on these issues?
Right. Well, Starksboro is a really small town, and so unlike Harrisonburg, we're dealing with a select board of elected folks who help to govern the town. And what we've been doing here is we helped to form an energy committee with a focus on climate, and kind of took the approach of there's the ruling group there had a much more sort of conservative take on climate change. But when we broke it down on economics, looked at how conservation and energy efficiency, which also improve climate, help to save money for the town and reduce burdens to taxpayers, all of a sudden ears started opening. And we were able to build a lot of bridges with people who might ordinarily, there might have been a political bridge that we couldn't cross if it was solely being challenged on a climate change agenda. So that's been really effective for us. And right now we're in the process of doing an inventory of all of the town owned buildings with an eye towards, what are the steps that could be taken to reduce their energy load, and then concurrently planning how we could match that with renewable energy. But we're trying to get the load down first. Look for all the old buildings that need to be weatherized, things that need upgrades, et cetera. And that's had a lot of traction with people, because it's really talking about the long-term well-being of the community on all the fronts: climate, economics, et cetera.
And speaking of the weatherization, I just had another stat here I had for you. I didn't get to you yet. 2/3 of the energy in the United States is wasted. Transmission, inefficiencies, all that stuff. So there's a lot to be done just in tightening things up and then moving out from there to do other things. Yes, and it's cost savings and climate savings.
Yeah,
thanks, Pete. Appreciate that.
Yeah, that's really important. The farther away your power is generated, the more loss there is.
Yes.
So generating it close to home and using less of it's key.
Can I ask another question about something you brought up earlier, David?
Sure.
You mentioned, I think it was 85% of greenhouse gas emissions have come since World War II. Is that right? 1945?
1945. Uh-huh.
What changed? Because cars began to be mass developed in the 20s and teens, and the Industrial Revolution took place in the 1800s. So what changed after 45?
I think consumerism. To me, that would be the main thing. Globally, as well as in the United States and in Europe and Japan and all that. That would be the main thing. Of course, population has increased, and just the size of our houses. I mean, all those things, the supersizing of everything. And, of course, cars have multiplied I think there's 1.1 or 1.2 cars for every licensed driver in the United States now, for instance. And I can remember growing up, my mom and my brother we caught the bus down here to ride to Roanoke. I mean, because we didn't have another car. So I think all those things.
Not one thing, but a combination.
A combination of things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Highway system has been massively increased.
Yeah, in the 50s. Yeah.
That's right.
Industrial agriculture, I would add, also since the 40s, where we kind of shifted away from being a more agrarian society, where a higher percentage of the population was producing food, now to less than 1% of the population is producing the food for everyone in this massive scale that requires a lot of fossil fuel inputs.
Yeah. Well, Eric, I've got a little wrap up here if you want it.
Oh, great. Please.
Any other
please share
questions
it.
or comments? I have just a little tiny wrap up for us, but I want to see if there's any other questions or comments before we go there.
When we're back in school, I hope you can come and visit my classes again someday.
Would love to. At the first opportunity, let me know when that can happen.
Okay, thank you.
I'm, chomping at the bit
Yeah.
to get out into this world. We did our Yellowstone Tetons trip here a couple of weeks ago, which was, we couldn't get to Alaska. They wouldn't let you in really. So we did Yellowstone to Tetons. So that was a nice little plan B. But I really am missing my fall school, congregation, college lineup. And I'm doing some things, I'll do some things virtually, but yeah, I'd be happy to, of course.
Thanks for being with us today.
Sure. Anybody else, questions or comments before I move into the wrap up?
Once, twice.
I gave
All
you a
right.
chance. I gave you your chance. So here we go. This will just be real short, but sorry, I thought it would be where I wanted it, and it wasn't. We're almost there. You may or may not recognize this. This is from September of 17. That's one of the vantage points that you're supposed to be able to see Half Dome. They saw the fires 3 years ago now, and you can see the victim of it back there to the left. So we'd gone there, and it was a little depressing, Frank. You don't go to the national parks, especially the signature parks like Yosemite, to get depressed. But I found myself slipping into depression when I saw the impact of the fires, and mostly the fires. There were other things too, but mostly the fires. Well, about the third day we were there, we went down to the visitor center, and you get to see the picture, the film, the Ken Burns film. And it was about this guy, who all you Californians probably recognize, but John Muir. And it talked about him immigrating from Scotland to the U.S. and started out in Detroit and thought better of it and came to California. But as he arrived, so did all the loggers and ranchers and miners and farmers. And he realized if we didn't stop this destruction now, it was going to be gone. I mean, these things take a while to grow back, as you can tell, and as you know well. So he had that brainstorm, which you probably also know this story better than me, but invited Teddy Roosevelt out for a 3-day camping trip. And was enough of a burr under Roosevelt's saddle to get that, have that experience and see these things, that he took up the cause, and you have these wonderful national parks in California right now, and really then across the country. Well, that same day we were down there, the smoke cleared a little bit. I got a fairly good look at Half Dome, turned the other side and saw El Capitan, and I could feel my spirits lifting to realize what a person with imagination, tenacity, and care for this beautiful earth could do, what a person could do. So, God said God would never destroy the place again, set the rainbow in the sky. Now I guess we've kind of got the whole world in our hands in many ways. And so if I get to heaven, that's one of the questions I want to put to the Lord. What were you thinking? But maybe God knows something about us that we don't know, and that yet, even yet, we may rise to the occasion. As David Wallace Wells says in his book, The Uninhabitable Earth, the only thing that stands between where we're headed and that better future we could have is human response. But he felt that's enough to give us hope, even in this difficult moment, in really global history and the history of our, and the upcoming history of our future, because the course we're setting now will be ours for thousands of years on this particular issue. I'm so grateful that you all care enough to talk about this for a better part of an evening. Well, I don't know what time it is out there. Better part of my evening, the late part of your afternoon. It says a lot about you and the things you care about. So thanks very much, and thanks for inviting me to be a part of the conversation.
Thanks for being here. Okay. Well, I think I would like to close us this time together with another reading. This is comes from Mother Teresa of Calcutta. We need to find God and God cannot be found in noise and restlessness. God is the friend of silence. See how nature, trees and flowers and grass grow in silence. See the stars, the moon and the sun, how they move in silence. The more we receive in silent prayer, the more we can give in our active life. So one of the things that we're doing, David and Sharon and Pete, during our worship on YouTube right now, when I shared this with David, we're in the season of creation, and that year's their focus this year is a jubilee for the earth. And you know, scripturally, jubilee is all about rest and renewal, and I think just looking at some of the pictures and facing climate, you know, change, it's time that we really need to consider how to change our lives as individuals, as communities, as nations, to allow for the earth to rest and be renewed. So I hope this is not the end of a conversation, but rather the beginning of a conversation for all of us to really consider how we might each better care for creation and begin to fight climate change in our own lives, and for us at Live Oak, how we might do this in our own community.